I'm going to just go ahead and kick it off here with some brief remarks. Again, everyone, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Tiana Ellington, the Assistant Director of Chapter and Regional Programming with the Alumni Association of Case Western Reserve University. And I hope that everyone and their loved ones are being safe and healthy. Before we get into tonight's program, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping notes. As I mentioned before, everyone is muted by default, but will be able to unmute later on during the question and answer portion. And that's just to limit any background noise during the presentations. So that I know who you are, if you can, please rename yourself under participants and the more option. That'll just help me out later on for attendance. And just a few campus updates. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Case Western Reserve's research has become vital to the fight against COVID-19. And we invite you to follow us on Facebook and the university's website, case.edu/together, for regular updates on research, academics, alumni, and students. In support of the ongoing conversation about race, equality, and social injustice in our country, Case Western Reserve has launched a race, police, and protest website. Found at case.edu/raceandjustice, it provides statements from university leadership and university resources, as well as opportunities for members of the CWR community to share their thoughts and voices. At the Alumni Association of Case Western, we continue to use our platform to promote connections with the CWRU community. For regular updates, please find us on social media at CWRU Alumni on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Now more than ever, we hope these virtual events and social media platforms can keep us connected. Tonight's performance of Opera Philadelphia's We Shall Not Be Moved will begin shortly. But first, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Heather Burton, Case Western Reserve University's Senior Director for Faculty and Institutional Diversity, and the co-director of the African and African American Studies minor. Dr. Burton has worked throughout her entire career to promote gender and racial equality in academic science and engineering fields at CWRU, as well as in 9 other universities across Ohio and Pennsylvania. Additionally, she is also the founder and CEO of Crimson Heights Ministries Incorporated, geared toward the holistic development of women.
That's right.
It is also my pleasure to introduce Dr. Daniel Bernard Romain, the composer of this evening's performance. Daniel is a prolific performer, activist, educator, accomplished violinist, and social entrepreneur whose career has spanned more than 2 decades. He currently serves as Institute Professor and Professor of Practice at Arizona State University, and has worked with artists from Philip Glass to Bill T. Jones to Lady Gaga, appeared on NPR, American Idol, and ESPN, and has even collaborated with the Sydney Opera House. Dr. Burton and Daniel will begin this evening by sharing a little more about themselves before diving into an in-depth discussion on just a few of the many themes found in tonight's show. Dr. Burton and Daniel, if you will.
Sure.
All right. Very nice to be here.
Yes, I say the same thing, Daniel. And I should say, Dr. Daniel, give you your accolades.
Yes, Dr. Burton. Very important.
Right.
Awesome.
Especially
Yes.
depending on what setting.
Yes, exactly. Oh, yes. We can be honest about, can we be that honest? Wow.
Yes, we can. We can probably start with that right now.
Okay.
Of what that does for you, especially when you're talking about being a Black person within academia and the privilege that you get from having advanced degrees that is not awarded to some. And so it does stand out in academia. And I remember, and not to put my institution on the spot, but when I first started, that's how I was introduced to everyone. And it was a shock because I came from another institution in which it was never an introduction. And so I think depending on where you are and what you're doing, that very often that privilege of advanced education opens certain doors.
Wow, I think you're right. I mean, I self-definition is equity. I always say that if you don't define yourself, someone else
Will.
will. I'm old enough to have been referred to as a composer, Negro composer, African American composer, Black composer. And about 20 years ago, I was very specific in referring to myself as a Black Haitian American composer. In fact, I was so adamant about it that if you Google search Haitian American composer right now, I think I come up first. But I say that because, not for ego, I say that as right. That, this is similar to, I've always referred to Black people with a capital B. Always.
Always.
Just for so many reasons, right? So in my career, which has a broad creative practice, there are times when I'm Daniel, DBR, Dr. Romain, Daniel Bernard Romain, so on and so forth. So I agree with you. I think that it's important in our BIPOC community that self-definition is an aspect of equity.
I agree. And when we talk about identity, I think about also just how, as a community, even as individuals, we get lost in that identity. And you mentioned, when you were talking, it made me start thinking about racial identity and how you've had the opportunity in your life to go from Negro to Black. And, and we've seen the change to African American. And when we talk about racial identity, we've gone from colored to Negro to Black. And I think for me, I identify as Black. And very often I identify, that identification came about because of just the concept of Black and the conceptualization of being a 70s and 80s person, where especially being exposed to individuals that were part of the Black Panthers, Black Power movement. And in that, it helped me to reclaim Blackness as being proud of being Black. And so, as you stated, using Black with that capital B. And even in all my writing, I laugh how I capitalize B and everything and with Black. And I think when we begin to know our identity, it also helps us with our own work. And it helps us as we navigate throughout systems of institutional racism, systems of prejudice, systems of discrimination. And so when we begin to know our own identity, I think that also helps us to navigate.
Absolutely. I was just I was just asked to take an interview, and the interviewer sent the questions that I was supposed to write the responses to. And it's just like, oh, okay, so I'm actually interviewing myself, right?
Right.
Okay. So I'm writing the responses, and I use capital B for Black people and lowercase w for white people.
White people.
And the reporter wrote me back. First thing she said was, I don't understand why you're doing that. She's very upset about it, actually. And I ended up showing her websites where, well, here's the reason. I'm a little bit surprised that you don't understand, but it's okay. It's okay. There are no wrong questions. But even after sending the websites and the explanations and the notion of affirmation and the decentering and the notion of white bias, white privilege, you talk about it, there was still, I could tell in her responses, this kind of agitation. Mm-hmm. Why couldn't the W also be capitalized? And just couldn't let it go. And then I remember thinking, wow, is she going to publish it the way I wrote it or the way she wanted it to be? And to her good credit, she did publish it with the lowercase w's, and that's fine. But it was a very interesting exchange. You're also reminding me, Dr. Burton, of, I was probably about 7 years old, went to Thanksgiving dinner at Veronica's house. Veronica and Vincent were the older white couple that were very good to my family. We were the first black couple, first black family to live in our neighborhood. We were the first black family, Margate, Florida. In fact, I remember the day we moved in, the next day fences went up around all the houses around us. I
Mm.
remember that. But Veronica welcomed us into her home for Thanksgiving. I remember that. I had just played the violin poorly for dessert. And there's a gentleman there, I can't remember his name, I'm sure he's passed, where he started talking to my father. My father was 285 pounds, muscle, and a bigger mind. He read everything: Time Magazine, National Geographic, Life Magazine, recent periodicals. I mean, just a chemist with a voluminous memory and mind. And he's engaged with this friend of Veronica, older white gentleman. At one point, this older white gentleman said, and there was this person, and this guy was colored. And up until then, my father was a very good listener, but he said, well, what color was he? And I remember the gentleman, it's black. My father said, well, I didn't know. I said, well, what color? And then my father said, well, what color are you? And he said, well, white. And he said, oh, I didn't know. I'm from Haiti. I have family that look just like you.
Right.
And I remember the same thing. The rest of the evening, this man was agitated. My father had really hit upon something, a nerve, that even as a 7-year-old, I couldn't quite make sense of it, but I knew my father was getting into his head and saying something really important. What color are you? So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's that conversation, and I think it's that conversation that, and especially when we talk about today, your mind, the things that you're saying is making my mind go in multiple directions. Because I think about my first experience with the capital B and lowercase w, and that was in my dissertation.
Oh.
And I had to have that conversation with my dissertation chair, because I wrote on the Black church. And so the Black church, you're talking about Black people. And in that, we had the conversation, and she was accepting of that, but it was still that conversation as to why the B was capital versus the W. But then I think about just having that conversation and where race is pointed out. Interestingly, I think about when I do trainings, and a lot of my trainings are around race relations and racial equity and gender equity, and how when I say race, I can see white people in the room just tense up. It's just like, or when you say anything about color identification, and I can also tell the difference, and I don't know if you've experienced this, Dr. Daniel, but when you use Black versus when people use African American. Sure. And the connotation behind Black, and how many people feel with the use of Black versus African American. And we know internally as a community, the distinguishing difference between why one is chosen over the other, with many philosophical thoughts behind, I'm not my ancestors came from Africa, but I'm not American. I'm not claiming that, reclaiming Black to make it part of your identity. And so you have all of these things, but when you use those two terms, when we talk about identity, it's very interesting to see the response that you get from individuals within those conversations. And it makes me think too, I'm going to switch gears for a minute, but it also makes me think about an experience that I had recently in which I had to deal with someone who kept negating the Black experience because they were part of a marginalized community. And as a part of a marginalized community, they kept stating that I am such and such, so I don't understand why students of color don't feel comfortable talking to me. I don't understand why students of color don't come to me. And it's that level of what they think is support, but actually becomes defense, and a defensive mechanism that negates the Black experience. And I think that's another element that when we talk about the struggle of Blacks and racial identity that, we have to deal with on a regular basis.
Well, it is a struggle. And the words that I'm latching onto are community, identity, struggle, dissertation, which...
Let's not latch onto that word anymore.
Well, it brings to mind the academy, and then, of course, for me, the street, and then education. I see education as the precise articulation of all life experiences, both victory and trauma. fact, we're all educators. I don't use the word teacher or student in my classes. I use the word contributors. We're all contributors to a classroom or world of ideas. But going back to this notion of community. So I'm looking today and I see, I see Patricia, I see Wilma, now you know, right? I see Paula, I see Shella, I see Nancy, I see your energy, right? Yes, Nancy. And right there, now we have something. I would even dare say we have a shared Zoom-based culture, right? I think Nancy is white. I think Wilma is black. I don't know. Ooh. Can I say that? I think Shella, look at Shella. Shella's almost doing the Malcolm X pose. It's okay. I see you, Shella. It's okay. That's right. That's right.
Name is Sheila.
Oh, Sheila. Oh, Sheila. You know what? My poor eyesight. I apologize. And there it is. Names are important. See that? Names are important. And that's why they are important. Jacob Blake.
Yes.
Names are important. I think, sorry, I'm trying to, we're talking about, you're so right, Dr. Burton. I want to live in a world community where Sheila can speak her truth, and it's important. And Nancy and I can share something that's important. But the truth is, if we're going to talk about the truth, is that the minute I step outside of this community, out into that world, Nancy, Sheila, we're not the same. And in an instant, the wrong law enforcement officer on the wrong day, at the wrong time, in the wrong place, where there's no more witnesses, nobody filming. You think he's the only one, by the way? I end up with 7 bullets in my back. No, I'm not talking to you. I'm saying, I'm saying to this community, that's what I'm scared of. I've got a son. This is his bed. Yeah, he might look like me, but even as he gets older, at what point does he become a threat? And the question for our community, this one right now, see what just happened? I'm trying to resist. I'm trying to be professorial. Can I be angry for a second?
Yes.
I just declared we're a community. Protect me. Protect my son. What are you going to do about it? You're not held captive. Are you going to call? Please, call. Everybody here probably has a cell phone. Call the police chief tomorrow and tell him you pay taxes, you want protection. You want protection for every black man in your community, every BIPOC person in your community, because I said so. Now, let me just take a minute. I'm so sorry. I don't want to go there with you just yet. We don't know each other. But Dr. Burton is talking about community. And I thought, and I feel, in any community, because we're going to talk about opera, in any community, we can tell the truth. We can feel it too.
But I think you touched on something which is very pertinent, and that's the word truth. And paraphrasing the quote from Malcolm X, when he talks about teaching a black man the truth, that he's heard the lies of the white man for so long, how do you even recognize the truth? And I think when we talk about community, and whether we're looking at the Zoom community, as you called some of the names on the Zoom community, or we're looking at the Black community, the white community, the Asian community, when we think about truth, we have been taught historically so wrong that, and for so long, that we don't recognize what truth is. And so, Dr. Daniel, you bring up a valid point in identifying what is truth and recognizing truth, recognizing police abuse of power, recognizing police brutality, recognizing a system of oppression within the police department, as Michelle Alexander pointed out, the new Jim Crow. And when we think about the system and the penal system of what happens to Black males, even Black females, and Breonna Taylor was asleep in her bed. She was not walking down the street. She was asleep in her bed. And the person that they were after was in police custody. Again, a broken system in which we're operating, in which we're trying to operate. And not only are we operating, but we're operating in this space of preconceived notions and biases and stereotypes about the big black man, the scary big black man, the scary black woman. I was listening to the other day an interview in which they were talking about Crispus Attucks and being killed during the Boston Tea Party, and how John Adams even admitted to the killing of Crispus Attucks because of him being a big black man. And if we're thinking of 1700s and our black men were being killed for the same reason that they're being killed in 2020, just now, August 25th, August 24th, when Jacob Blake was shot. If we're talking 1700s, 2020, and we're talking truth is the reality that racism is real. And I think you and I have had this conversation before of the acknowledgement that racism exists, the acknowledgement that there is a difference in the races that we don't want to recognize, we don't want to talk about, we don't want to discuss, and we want to shy away from. And so I think that word truth is such a powerful word when we use it, especially like you said, when we use it in the academy and in academic settings. When we think about our textbook, think about the high school textbooks, think about the middle school textbooks of what our students are learning within the educational system. And they're still learning from a racist European perspective. And until we get to a perspective which includes all within the history, then we still are going to be in this untruth or but I can't even think of now, but just skewed vision. I was trying to think of the alternative facts.
Oh,
Baseball alternative facts.
Alternative facts.
I think, we have to really recognize, and I appreciate, your passion and your concern as not only a black male, but a black father to a black son. And the safety of that black son every day that he walks out of the front door. Yeah. And from the day that he walked, from the time that he starts maturing. And if we go and look at Tamir Rice was 12 years old. And we think about the adolescence, and even the term when we talk about race and black children, adultification, and how in the education system, the expectation that we have on black children versus that we have on white children. And the same behaviors, black children are being suspended at a higher rate. They're being expelled at a higher rate. And they're always in trouble because of their behaviors, which are synonymous with the behaviors of white children. But because of the expectation that society has put on black and brown children, this is what we get. Okay, so I didn't mean to rant either, but
it's okay.
You took me to a whole nother.
All feeling. It's feeling.
Right. We won't talk about health disparities, but I will go on to something else first.
Sure. Wow. Well, and I think, are we going to be able to take questions and comments from people?
Yes,
too,
I think.
Okay.
All right. And I was over here reading the chat because there was someone who had said something.
Sure. Well, I think, as we think about health and this opera, which some of you may be watching tonight, even the title, which has a kind of a biblical reference, "We shall not be moved." I think one way to think about this is that I think the performance that you will watch, have watched, or will watch was a matinee. It was children from Philadelphia. I don't want to say that, a challenged part of Philadelphia, who were seeing, in some cases, maybe an opera for the first time. How wonderful for them. Because what they saw was a cast of mostly BIPOC people. The lead protagonist, the lead singer, is a spoken word artist entitled Unsung. In fact, the two lead characters are two women of color, one of whom is a wonderful opera singer who regularly sings at the Metropolitan Opera, Kristen Chavez. I think that's right, Stephen. If that's wrong, the crediting gets it right. I did the music, Mark Bamuti Joseph, the great Mark Bamuti Joseph, who's a writer, spoken word artist, performer, dancer, choreographer, and as a day job is a vice president at Kennedy Center. Wrote the lyrics. And the great Bill T. Jones, dancer, choreographer, author, Imagineer. In his day job, he's the executive director of New York Live Arts in New York. I'm sure many of you know the great Bill T. Jones, Broadway Tony Award winner. Did the choreography and directed, did the choreography. And it's one of the few instances where you have an opera where the principal creative team are black men. The cast is very diverse, almost entirely BIPOC people, and it was commissioned by Opera Philadelphia. I think it's the city of, maybe it should be the city of human love, the city of brotherly love, city of human love. It's almost 2 hours long, maybe an hour and a half, and it's real. It tells the story of 5 children who have decided to no longer go to school, and have they started to live in an abandoned house. And in that house are 5 ghosts of 5 children who become their teachers. And what they don't know is that years ago in that same house, and this is real, there was a multicultural community called the Move Organization who composted in the backyard. Their children were born at home, who wore their hair in a natural hairstyle, who all adopted the last name Africa. Many of the things that Gwyneth Paltrow does today, they were doing then. Their neighbors didn't like it. Law enforcement and local fire departments were called. Somebody had the idea to drop an incendiary device on a wood frame house, burned it to the ground, along with hundreds of other houses around it. I'm sure many of you remember the Move incident. Some of the survivors of that day, Sue Africa, Ramona Africa, will tell you that as they tried to flee the house, they were shot. Bullets buzzed by. They had to retreat back into the burning house. It's tragedy. It is still very much an open wound in Philadelphia. Our opera picks up where that event ended. And as you know, like a lot of public school systems, the Philadelphia public school system is challenged. And I have to not without telling you too much, there's the use of a gun in the opera. Who holds it is significant. And the opera unfolds in a very, unfortunately, relevant and painful manner. Yeah. Okay. So that's what happens when a black Haitian American composer is given the opportunity to tell his story through an operatic art form. And I know that opera, and I've studied them, sometimes operas deals with unicorns and fairies and rings. But sometimes operas can deal with other stories. And this one is an important one, beyond Philadelphia. Yeah, okay. Sorry, Dr. Burton.
No, that's okay. You go ahead and talk. I'm actually, interestingly, I'm responding to some of our viewers.
Oh, great. Yes.
But as you're talking,
yes.
I'm to some of the viewers.
Please do that. Please do that.
I was letting you go ahead and explain and continue to explain the opera because this is your piece and you're more familiar, especially when you talk about. But I do have a question for you, Dr.
Sure.
Ben.
Sure.
And I guess I should ask that while I'm thinking about it. Is what has it been like to be a Black composer working in an opera setting?
Well, okay. So it's a great question. Let me see if I can say it this way succinctly. I think if you're here today in this space of captivity and creation, we're all breathing. Let's take a breath together. Maybe one more time. Okay. So we're bound by the privilege of breath. We're alive. We know that in the hour of this conversation, people are going to die from either COVID-19 or complications of it. You may know people who have already passed. People are dying right now. Think about how close they might be. Maybe just a few miles down the road, somebody is struggling to take their last breath. So privilege is easy to start to demarcate and to identify. So what it feels like to be a Black Haitian American composer given the opportunity to write an opera is extreme privilege and responsibility. That's why I don't feel responsible. I don't feel like writing about unicorns or goblins or rings would be the most responsible thing for me to do, even though I could. So it feels like an added responsibility, which I relish in, to tell a real story that has depth and relevancy to all of us, not just my community, all of us, the city of Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. What was it? When the looting starts, the shooting starts?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't him, but all these miscommunications and weird revolutions of revolution. I think that's where we are. I want to give us, I'm trying to give, let me end there with saying to you that if you look at my work has always centered on, well, I used to say the Black experience, but now I realize what I was actually doing. I was actually talking to humanity wrapped in social justice. So I write symphonies that are called hip-hop essay and orchestras. Even the titles, Voodoo Violin Concerto, Hip-Hop Studies and Etudes, Gangsta Studies, We Shall Not Be Moved, opera, Dancers, Dreamers, and Presidents for Obama and Ellen DeGeneres, dancing on her show. That's where my work, in fact, my dissertation was a piece called Harlem Essay, in which I sampled my landlady's voice, my landlord's voice, Harlem, or Mrs. Logan. Mrs. Logan was about 90 years old, lived in Harlem all her life. Ralph Ellison, she talks about Ralph Ellison, Zora Neale Hurston. These were her friends. These are people she knew or her mother knew. And I sampled her voice, set it against a 100-piece orchestra. It was premiered in Carnegie Hall. This is it was a piece and a paper. Miss Logan came to Carnegie Hall with 100 of her best friends, full mink. This is her church. They had a bus. They went out to dinner. You understand? Okay, let me just 25 seconds on this. It was the top floor of her brownstone that I lived in. We would have dinner together. She would tell me all of these stories all the time. When 9/11 hit, her reference was Pearl Harbor and the sirens. I sampled her voice at that dinner table. I set it against an orchestra in Carnegie Hall. Dennis Russell Davies. She came in the full mink coat with all of her friends. They took up the middle section, the best seats in the house. And when the orchestra was clapping and the conductor was acknowledging me to come take a bow, she stood up. She stood up. It was fantastic, and I miss her so much. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't a succinct answer, but yeah, that's the truth.
Yeah. Do you feel that I'm sorry? Now I feel like I'm going in interview, but I'm so used to doing interviews.
It's okay. It's great.
I forgot I'm not interviewing, and I'm part of the panel. But I did have a question because you made me think. With that, do you feel a commitment or a responsibility to write positive work around, or work that encourages the Black community, that uplifts, that supports, and even tells a story, even if it's not a positive or, a happy ending story, but it tells the truth of the Black community or in the Haitian community? Do you feel a responsibility to do that writing?
I do. I do. And as a parent now, speaking to Nancy in the chat, or I'm so sorry, Janvi in the chat, look, I see it this way. If there are children in your community, they're your children. They really are. There are Black children and white children and Asian children and Native American children, but they're your children. Even if you don't have children, if you are an adult person living in a community, as most of you are, and there are children in that community, they're your children, right? Jacob Blake's children are our children. By extension, our children. Isn't that a good way to think about it? So I do. I as a parent, I understand that my son is half black, half white, half German, half Jewish, half Haitian, half German. I mean, his DNA is rich, and I'm responsible for it. In this part of Massachusetts, where I am right now, I live in New York City, Massachusetts, and Tempe, Arizona. He doesn't have, and his friends don't have, a lot of black male role models. I'm it. And, you know, he's navigating a very different world. He told me about Tulsa and what was going on TikTok, and he wanted to buy tickets to the Republican National Convention, and I said no. I didn't understand what was happening, revolution, until after the fact.
Yeah.
That they were able to shut that thing down. And he said, 11 years old, he said, Dad, we're saving lives. You dig? He knows about Claudia Conway, the daughter of Kellyanne Conway. Alternate facts. So without getting too political, I feel that as a composer and principally as a father, I know that I'm co-parenting not only with his mother, and we do get along. I'm divorced. Truth. But I'm co-parenting with his friends. I'm co-parenting with his phone. I'm co-parenting with that flag. See what he sleeps under? Since the day he was born. That's the Haitian national flag. Haiti's flag. I'm co-parenting with you, Dr. Burton. You know, he might be online. He does that. He likes to come in and sneak in and suddenly, oh, Zach. Or, you know, he has this whole thing. But I also feel, Dr. Burton, that I feel reassured that the four facets of, as we've talked about, truth and reconciliation, and perhaps rehabilitation, is acknowledgement, accounting, accountability, apology, and then action. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Burton, I can say to you, I haven't always gotten it right when it comes to black women. I have an older sister and a younger sister. I can't speak for black women. I have to be reminded of that. Okay. I know that I have to account for my own equity audit. I have not commissioned black women, and I could have. And I will. I apologize. You know, I see Sheila, and if my mother was here, Sheila, right now, she would, I know what she'd say. She'd say, oh, thank you. Are you hungry? Can I order something for you? I did my prayers today. You know, she'd want to know about your faith. She'd go right there. And then she'd want to know about your mother, your father. There'd be something about your eyes, Sheila, that I know if my mother were here, she'd just want to talk to you. And then gloat, hopefully, well, she'd say to you, I hope he's not embarrassing me. And then she'd tell you all the horrible, embarrassing things I've done over the years. Because she'd want to be your friend. She made that. See that right there? That's a frame. My son was about 4 months old. She took his clothes, put him in a frame. Now she has vascular dementia. She doesn't remember making that at all. There's no memory of it. But one day I think to myself, Zachary might be 80, 90 years old, holding that frame, talking about his Nana. And then you can have action. I know we're going to take questions from you now, but Dr. Burton, maybe we can start off our question and comment period with, how do you feel about action?
Is that a question for me? Is that a question for
that's a question for you.
for everyone?
For everyone, for you and for everyone. How do you? Yeah. What do you do? What do you do?
Action is necessary. And I was on a panel yesterday. I was hosting a panel yesterday on why now, in terms of advocacy and social justice. So why all the buy-in now? Why are we finally, or why are individuals finally saying, okay, after the killing of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, I'm ready to jump on this fight for social justice. I'm ready to jump on this fight. And the word action, one of the panelists used, and I elaborated on that word, then when we think about anything that we do in terms of moving the agenda forward, and knowing that agenda, and I always back up too, is that you have to know why you're doing what you're doing, and why you are a part of any movement, whether that's social justice, whether that's fighting institutional racism, whether that's fighting microaggressions, being a bystander to stereotypes. But you have to understand your own reasons for doing what you do when it comes to the struggle. And action is a verb. It means to do. It means to do. And when we think about anything, action doesn't always mean marching. It doesn't always mean protesting. It doesn't always mean being very vocal and outspoken like myself some days. But action can be in the smallest things of writing a letter to your senator, writing a letter to your congressperson, checking your neighbor for the language or the words or the discriminatory words that are used in their conversation. And so action, I say action is a necessity, that if we are going to move the agenda, we have to be involved in some level of action. But we also, I go back to your word truth, and I stand on that truth. We have to be honest and we have to be transparent. And you said this before, and we have to acknowledge. And in that acknowledgement, we have to apologize. And as a country, we have to apologize. As individuals, we have to apologize. And then we can't look for the responsibility to fall on one person when we're talking about this movement forward. But I will stop talking with my definition of action and what I feel. And I know that, we have people that you and I both have been chatting with on the chat. So I don't know if any of those people want to speak, especially with the last few minutes that we have.
Sure. Yeah. Any questions? Any comments? The world needs your thoughts. That's action, by the way. Don't be afraid. The first one's the hardest one. So jump on in.
Wish I understood how I got in the middle of this.
Sheila, it's good to hear your voice. Well, it's energy. Energy comes out of the frame. As artists, energy isn't relegated by even this frame. So it's your energy. It's look at the sunlight coming through. This is being recorded, by the way. Look at that. Your light is beautiful. You have this smile, this energy. Nancy too. Wilma.
And as Daniel stated, you had one of my favorite first poses, the Malcolm X pose.
Yeah,
and stood out.
That's iconic. Iconic. But it's a good question.
And the wrong color for that.
No, that's okay. That's okay. In my business, someone like a Bill T. Jones would say, hey, let's take the script from Malcolm X, Spike Lee's script, and cast all white women. Well, that's how an artist, it's a different. Matter of fact, we did a piece called The Table Project many years ago in Minneapolis, Walker Art Center. The screen is closed, it opens up, you see this large table, huge, fantastical, and chairs, like for a giant. Suddenly, 6 little girls run out, and they're running on the table, and they're doing the things that little girls do. It's only about 3 minutes, and they're gone, and the screen closes. All the while, there's a trio by, I think, Schumann playing. I'm playing the violin. The screen opens. There comes 6 boys. Little boys, maybe 10 years old, a little older. They're doing the same thing the little girls did, and then they're gone. Woo, screen closes. Screen opens again. Here comes 6 old men, all different colors, doing the same thing the little girls and the little boys was, but it's hard. Struggling, and they are gone. The screen closes. It opens again. Here comes 6 women doing the same thing. They're much older than the little girls. And the screen closes. That's it. That's the whole piece. So, sorry, you did ask a question. How did you get to the middle of it? I love that. See, there's something, we should put that in the chat. How did I get in the middle of it? How do we stay in the middle of it? What do we do? Isn't that the question? You know, I'm a proud board member of the League of American Orchestras. I shouldn't talk about this, but it's okay. We just had a big meeting on race in American orchestras. Here's the feeling of that, and there was well over 300 people in this Zoom meeting. Here's what I got from that. So many people want to do something, number one. Number two, so many people don't know what to do. Don't you kind of feel that way sometimes? Yeah. So as Dr. Burton was saying, and I wrote it down actually, action can be in the smallest things. Scale. A tweet, y'all. John Coltrane said, give me one note, I'll give you the universe. A tweet can change things. I'm not talking about him. A look, a smile. Give me 15 more seconds just to say this, because I want to make it immediate. As a black man, you know what I want to do, my next piece? A pas de deux. Those who know. A pas de deux between a cop and a composer. We both have our weapons of choice. We're both in our uniforms. We both embrace, maybe kissing, mouth to mouth, resuscitation. Maybe I have sat down with this cop and rewritten their first year manual together. That's the libretto. And the piece is on Zoom, and we're talking about, you know, because this has never happened to me. I've never had a law enforcement officer come up to me and say the things I was just sharing with Sheila. Hello, how are you? How are you feeling today? My name is Officer. What's yours? This never happened. This is what my mother taught me when I was 3 years old, Sheila. It is exactly what my mother would do if she were here right now. Because I know what she's doing right now. She's watching EWTN. She's done 3 masses today. On the knees, standing up, on the rosary. The black Christ, white Christ. Next to her is a candle, and it's lit. Waiting for me to call her right after this on Alexa. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Dr. Burton. I'm too comfortable, y'all. The professorial person has left the building.
That's what the Zoom audience wants to hear, is the comfort level. They don't want this to be a classroom.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
I think that there has been a comfort level. And Tiana, I'm not sure. I see you unmuting, so I think that means that we are over time.
Oh.
It's okay. I was going to say, if anyone else has any questions, you can drop them in the chat. I will get them to Dr. Burton and Dr. Daniel. After the performance, we might still have time to revisit, but this doesn't have to be the end of this conversation at all.
Agreed. Well, thank you, Tiana. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burton, Dr. Daniel.
Thank you, Dr. Burton. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you for having us, Dr. Daniel. I enjoy talking with you and,
Great, Nancy.
And sharing, and especially sharing your knowledge, your wisdom, and your talent.
I appreciate that. You know, you're right. I believe, Nancy just said, I believe we all need to love each other from both sides. Hey, I love that. Take it over. What is your pledge of allegiance? I pledge to be better, to do better, to see the beautiful, to see beyond race as I love my black body. Mm-hmm. That I don't know about the human race. Do all lives matter? I don't know, but sometimes black lives don't. But I do believe, I declare my love for Nancy and Sheila and Wilma and Kat and Margot and Rachel and Tiana and Stephen and Marilyn and Paula. And for Opera Philadelphia. And, you know, I see you, I need you. God bless you, and may the universe keep you. Leave it at that.